Hello, and welcome to the first ever episode of the Turn Outward podcast. Those of you that have followed the podcast for a while know that the recording that you're actually about to listen to isn't the original recording for episode one. So, in January of this year, 2024, I recorded episode one just on my iPhone and uploaded it audio only to Spotify for podcasters. And it was about 18 to 20 minutes long. And it was just me talking into my phone, me kind of sharing my story and why I was starting this podcast. And so the recording that you're actually about to listen to is an interview between me and my friend Brody Tomasic. So you can listen to my interview with Brody for Turn Outward in episode 25. Okay. And so this recording that you're about to listen to is when Brody interviewed me for his podcast, which is called the Live It Be It podcast. And I wanted to replace the original recording because, quite frankly, it's not very good. And to this day, episode one is my most listened to episode. And it was just kind of me recording on my phone, just trying to simply get a podcast episode out there, and it wasn't very good. And so I don't want my most listened to episode to be not the best product, right? And so I'm going to replace the original episode one with this interview with Brody. And in this interview, I go much more in depth about my story. The interview is just over an hour and 15 minutes long, and I basically started my life story from the beginning, from one of my first memories at 3 years old, and then I end the podcast kind of talking about my entire life story and what I think means to live life to the fullest. And while I'm here, I just want to add to a few things that I said. So I start off kind of going through my life story of my first memory when I'm 3 years old. Something that's significant to add to my story before that memory is when I was 6 months old, I actually experienced a fall where I fell and fractured my skull. I rolled off a table and was rushed to the emergency room and had to have some fluid drained from my brain, suffered a significant severe concussion, and had a lot of swelling right around the front of my brain, right? And so this was the area of my brain kind of right over what's known as the prefrontal cortex, right? And the prefrontal cortex is the part of your brain which deals with attention, focus, planning, decision making, weighing consequences, weighing multiple outcomes. It's kind of the executive functioning part of your brain, right? And people with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder or attention deficit disorder, ADHD, ADD, they struggle with these sorts of activities. And what's found in these studies is that people with ADHD have less prefrontal cortex activation, right? And so I later found out when I was 5 years old, I was diagnosed with ADHD. And so this fall that I experienced when I was a baby really drastically impacted my life in a lot of ways, because there were a lot of jokes going on in middle school and later on in life. It's like, oh, were you dropped as a baby sort of thing? Or like, are you brain damaged or whatever it is, right? And the fact that I had actually experienced a fall like that led to a lot of insecurities, right? And I felt fundamentally broken from a very young age. I felt like something that I had experienced when I was a baby had kind of controlled and determined a lot of my outcomes. And I'll get into that, as I'll explain more of that as you guys listen to the interview with me and Brody. And then I just want to add on to the very end of the podcast, right? Brody asks me, what does it mean to live life to the fullest? And my answer was basically, come what may and love it. Take life as it comes at you and appreciate what is in your life without necessarily needing more. And I think that's very solid advice. And the only thing I would add to that is living life to the fullest is also turning outward. And I'll talk more about what turning outward means in the interview, but turning outward is overcoming the tendency to focus on yourself, overcoming the tendency to worry about yourself and your problems, right? And even in the moments of your greatest suffering, of your greatest anxiety, turning to someone else and trying to help them, trying to serve them. And it's completely opposite to what the world tells us. It's completely opposite to what self-help and psychology and me as what I do currently as a mental health counselor, I operate and I work in that world, right? And the message of turn outward is so radical. It flips everything that we think we know on its head, right? The logical answer is focus on yourself, work on yourself, improve yourself. The message of turn outward is get over yourself, overcome yourself. And that is truly the best way to find yourself. And if you're listening to this, thank you for being here. Thank you for joining me on this turn outward journey. I hope you enjoy the very first episode of it. And I hope that what you listen to in this podcast blesses and enhances your life in some way. And if it does, I'd love for you to share it with other people, whether that be following the podcast on social media or following it on Spotify or Apple Podcasts if you're listening to it there. Thank you so much for being here and enjoy the interview. So, who am I and what is Turn Outward? My name is Spencer Smalley, and I'm currently completing my master's in social work in order to become a licensed therapist. I've worked in mental health for 3.5 years now, and I see some concerning trends in mental health that I want to speak out against. Number one, I want to normalize being vulnerable in an online world of comparison where we post about our highs and don't talk about our lows. Number two, I want to change the narrative that we need to heal ourselves before we can help other people. Finding connection and purpose in helping others is crucial to our own healing. Number three, I want to share my faith. David Bednar says that the character of Jesus Christ is to turn out when the natural man would turn inward. Me and my guests share stories of how trusting in a higher power has allowed us to love and serve others in deeper and more meaningful ways. I want to build bridges of belief regardless of someone's underlying religious or spiritual background. I hope you'll join me in my journey of trying to help the world turn outward.
Welcome to the Live It Be It podcast. Today, I have a very special guest. He's become a good friend of mine now. We met, like a month ago or so?
It was back in May, right?
Was it really back in May?
Yeah, Caden's birthday.
Holy cow, time has flown by.
That's over quick. 4 months, brother.
Wow. That's crazy. We have Spencer Smalley on the podcast today. The reason why I wanted to bring Spencer Smalley on the podcast, and you get to know him here a little bit, but he's just, number one, a very genuine person doing some really good things. He has his own podcast that he hosts called Turn Outward, and he's a psychologist, therapist, working his way up, doing some really good work out there. But besides that, what would you like people to know about you, Spencer?
Well, first off, thank you for that introduction. It's kind of cool to be on this side of the mic. Having my own podcast, I've done a lot of interviews, but this is my first official time being interviewed on a podcast. So hopefully I don't mess it up too badly. But
you're gonna do great.
Thank you for that introduction. And I guess I should clarify, I'm technically not a psychologist. A psychologist is someone with their doctorate in psychology. So I do have a bachelor's degree in psychology, but I'm currently doing a master's in social work in order to become a licensed clinical social worker, which allows you to do therapy. It's one of the many paths you can take to do mental health therapy. And so that's kind of the route that I'm taking currently. So I'm halfway through my master's program. I just finished my first year internship, and I've continued to work at the practice I did my internship at. And we just work with court-ordered clients, people with domestic violence and substance abuse charges. And I've been able to run group therapies and do individual therapy sessions and kind of take more of an education psychotherapy angle with it, but also get some experience in a therapeutic setting working with clients one-on-one. So that experience has been absolutely incredible. And I've learned that I really love doing therapy. And that's something that I felt for a while that I would love, from different life experiences I had, and I'll talk more about that. But actually being able to do it now has been really, really fulfilling and gratifying. And I started the Turn Outward podcast in January, and basically just built on the principle that one of the greatest things we can do for our own mental health is to flip our entire worldview to where it's no longer about us, but it's about helping build, love, and serve other people. And I'll kind of talk about the things in my life that happened that led me to that point. But that's kind of the philosophy that Turn Outward is built on, and the experience of getting to interview people and hear their stories, allow them to be vulnerable, and also being vulnerable myself, and talking about how helping others has improved our lives has been really, really transformational. I almost feel like every interview is kind of like a little therapy session, and you feel really good afterwards. It's a very therapeutic thing to do. So really excited to have this discussion today.
Yeah, me too. And it was a privilege to be on your podcast not too long ago. And I can 100% agree. After you do like a podcast or an interview with somebody, it just feels really good. And I think a big reason is because you're able to get inspired, you're able to get ideas, and it's like, for at least for me, listening to other podcasts and doing this podcast excites me to be able to go out into the world and to create more and do more. And so that's kind of the overall goal. And one of the big goals of what we wanted to talk about today, and especially what I wanted to talk about specifically with you, is on the topic of connecting with others. A huge reason of why I created Vivier was because I wanted to create like a place where people could meet, where they could connect, build relationships, because there's like this whole loneliness epidemic that's going on, or pandemic, I should say, around the world. But it's crazy because it's almost paradoxical, because never have we like been able to connect with more people in the world than in the history of time than now, with social media, with texting, with calling, and all these other forms of digital communication. But for a lot of people I've talked to, and from some of the research that I've seen, more and more people feel lonely, and more people don't feel like they're connecting or having deep, meaningful relationships with other people. And so I wanted to basically talk to you about, like, for you and like your story, why are meaningful connections important?
Well, thank you for that. And I do want to say, before I kind of get into that I really love what you're doing here, Brody. Like, I'm really inspired by the Live It Be It podcast. I'm really inspired by Vivier community. I love the name because I speak Spanish as well, and I love the message of living life to the fullest. And I think kind of my ideas on that have changed pretty radically in the last few years, and I can get more into that. But really inspired to see someone like you, that I think there's a lot of overlap in what the message that both of us are trying to share and what we're trying to do. And hopefully we can continue to collab a little bit and see what we can do to help this troubled world, I guess. There's a lot of crazy things going on. A lot of people that feel isolated, lonely, jaded, misunderstood. And we ultimately just want to help people feel better and not experience as much of that. In terms of my story, I've thought a lot about kind of what I want to share. And I kind of want to start at the very beginning, I guess. One of the earliest memories that I have is when I was probably 2 or 3 years old. And I remember being in my living room, and I was the youngest of 6 kids. I remember I was with all my siblings in this living room. They're all kind of gathered around me. And one of my older sisters, she had one of her baby doll cribs that was kind of in the middle of the living room. And I had this pillow and blanket, and I was trying to like fit inside of this baby doll crib, but I was like a little too big to fit in it. And I was getting kind of like frustrated that I couldn't fit in it. And my siblings, looking back, I can now tell that they just thought it was cute. They genuinely thought this was cute, but they were like laughing at me. And I remember being so frustrated and embarrassed that they were laughing at me because I thought they were making fun of me. And so I think from a very young age, I was very self-conscious and just kind of hyper focused on how other people perceived me. And I didn't want people to perceive me in a negative way that made me feel stupid or small. And so I kind of carried that belief throughout my life. I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was 5 years old. And I didn't really know what that meant at the time. I just knew that I was kind of hyperactive and crazy, and I had a really hard time paying attention to things. And so I kind of struggled in school. I struggled with my relationships with teachers. I would kind of frustrate them, and I always kind of seemed to be getting in trouble, and getting sent to the principal's office, having my teachers have to talk to my parents and sort of things. And so I think I kind of developed this behavior over time that my behavior was a burden in some sort of way. And I think I really just wanted attention, and I just wanted to be seen in a more positive way. And I think some of my ways of acting out were to make people laugh, make my peers laugh at the expense of my teachers a lot of the time. Because I was so self-conscious about being seen in a negative way that I wanted to flip it and be seen in a positive way. And just my way about going about doing that wasn't always the most effective. And I think as I kind of got older, sports kind of started to be my saving grace in a way. I started to see sports as a way to kind of level the playing field, and to kind of explain that there are a few things that just made me feel different or broken than everyone else. So I've mentioned the ADHD thing. So I started taking a medication for that when I was like probably 6 or 7 years old. And I kind of developed the belief that I needed this pill to fix my brain, that my brain was fundamentally inferior to other people's, and I needed this thing to make me normal. And so they would pull me out of like the normal classrooms where all my other peers were, and they put me in this smaller classroom with a group of like 5 or 6 other kids, and we were all kind of like the special kids. Some of us were on the autism spectrum, some of us had ADHD, some of us were a little bit more low functioning with Down syndrome and other disabilities, and we're just kind of grouped into like this small little classroom. And I remember like feeling like, oh, I'm one of the dumb kids, or I'm one of the special kids, and having that really impact how I viewed myself. And so I felt just kind of different and fundamentally broken in that way. And then I also grew up as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and we went to church every Sunday, and that's been a huge part of my story and about who I am, and I'm still active in the church today. But growing up, I grew up in New Jersey, and where there weren't as many members of the church as there are here in Utah. And so I was very different from my peers. Like I remember casually saying in one of my elementary school classes, like my parents don't drink coffee. And then everyone was like, what? That's so weird. What the heck? Mm-hmm. And so I'd kind of get comments over the years about how weird my beliefs were and how weird my religion was. And that like really got to me, especially as I got into middle school too. I'd get comments. There's a lot of misconceptions about the church and about members of the church. There are people that think that we still practice polygamy and that we have multiple moms, multiple wives, and all these sort of things. So I get comments like, I came from a big family, 6 kids, right? And so people would be like, so how many of you guys come from your mom, and how many of you guys come from your dad's other wife, and stuff like that. And people asking me like if I had multiple moms, my dad had multiple wives and stuff. And so I always just felt like people perceived me as like this outcast, this kind of weird kid. And I found that sports were kind of my way to level the playing field, because I grew up playing a lot of basketball and a lot of football. And I'd play it during recess and after school. I remember literally playing football every single day after school. I got more than a couple concussions from that, and so, but I was a very naturally athletic kid, and I could play really well, and I found that that was a way to get people to like me and to people to kind of accept me and be like, okay, he might have to take this pill because and go to the special classes, and he might be from this weird religious family, but like at least he can ball a little bit, you know, at least he can, you know, at least he's really good at sports, so maybe he's not as weird as I think is. That's kind of how I perceived other people, and so I really started to attach my value to sports. Growing up in New Jersey, I just wanted to play football. Like I loved football. I watched college football every Saturday, and my family had this no football on Sunday rule. So I'd fake being sick so I could stay home from church and watch football without my parents knowing. And I got caught a couple times for that. But, growing up, the Little League football games were on Sundays. And so I couldn't play Little League football. And that was like really damaging for me because I loved playing it with my friends after school, but then I'd go home and then their football practice would start, and I would literally, like, our house was across the street from the football field, and I would just watch the football practice like from the window, like this lonely little child. It was almost like a movie scene, dude. It was like just wanting to play football so bad because that's what I felt like made me normal, and the fact that I couldn't participate because of my religion like made me feel even more alienated from other people. And so at the age of 12, we ended up moving here to Harriman, Utah, and I could finally play football. And so I started playing Little League football, and I loved it. And I felt like I had all this athletic potential, but I could never really fulfill my potential because things like getting really emotional at practice and getting upset with coaches and teammates would kind of get in the way. And I wasn't really able to control my emotions. I wasn't really able to control my mindset as well as I wanted to. And so I felt like I was constantly falling short of my potential. And so I stopped playing football in ninth grade. I had a lot of concussions at that point, and my football career hadn't really gone how I hoped it had. And so I'd started to show a little bit more promise in basketball. And so my identity became being a basketball player, playing really well in basketball. There was a girl I liked that played on the girls' basketball team, and so I also wanted to play on the high school basketball team for that reason. And so I played on the junior high school team in ninth grade, and we won a state championship. And so I was like gearing up. I didn't want to try out for the high school team in ninth grade because freshmen rarely made the team, and so I was like, sophomore year is like my 1 year to make the basketball team. And because like if you're not, they rarely kind of took juniors and seniors that hadn't played on the team before. And so I'm like, this is like my 1 year, my one chance to make the basketball team. And so I spent basically an entire year just training really, really hard to make the basketball team. All right, because that's what I based my value in, because I perceive sports as a way to gain attention, to impress girls, to entertain people, and basically have value. And that's kind of, I never really felt like I had that. And so I was kind of seeking that in sports. And so I spent the entire year just, running a lot, running 5-6 miles at a time, multiple times throughout the week, dribbling drills for hours. I'd go out in my garage and just dribble for hours, and then just hours and hours of shooting drills, trying to get my outside shot better. And I practiced really hard, and I got like really good at basketball, but I think I got really good at kind of playing like as an individual, and not as good as like, I didn't understand like plays as well. I didn't really understand how to play on a team. Like my concept of playing was to be the scorer, right? The person that could score a lot. And I got really good at scoring, but I didn't really know what to do if there was someone guarding me that I couldn't seem to score on, and how to like get my teammates involved and all these sort of things. And so I got to tryouts, and I made it to the final cut, right? And then I got matched up against a starting point guard. and he was just locked down on defense. Like I could not score on this kid. I got the ball literally stolen from me 5 plays in a row, fast break layups for this guy. And it was right in front of the head coach of the basketball team. And so I got cut, and it was genuinely devastating for me, right? Because that's kind of how I saw my value and things. And I don't know if you wanted to fix that light, but
I think you died. That's okay.
all good. And so I was like genuinely super depressed after not making the basketball team. And so then I kind of shifted. At that point, I basically saw my sports career is over. Like I realized I'm probably not going to play college sports. I'm probably like not going to play basketball or football in high school. So I need to find another identity. And I think, I started to run cross country and I played volleyball. But those were kind of just more for fun. I think I shifted into girls and dating as like a means of my identity. And especially as a teenager, like 15, 16, 17, I really became like this hopeless romantic. And I would always like fantasize about, meeting some girl, or if I had a crush at the time, like being able to have a relationship with that girl. And I would like make up like movie like scenes in my head, and just kind of daydream about these certain things. And I think that's pretty normal. But yeah, I would just constantly think about having a girlfriend, thinking about having a relationship. And that was kind of how I saw my value. Like if I'm valuable as a man or a boy at the time, then girls are going to want me. They're going to want to desire me, that sort of thing. And so I think at the time I was very much focused on like physical attractiveness. Like the girls that I liked were like really pretty girls. And I didn't, I'd try and talk to them and there wasn't necessarily like a connection with them. And I attributed that to me, like that I wasn't good enough at talking to people, or I was just too awkward. And what was probably going on was just there just genuinely wasn't a good connection with this particular person, and I was just focused on looks. But I would always attribute it to some fundamental inadequacy in myself, And then, so flash forward to senior year, and there had been kind of this girl in one of my classes during my junior year that was kind of different, and I liked her, but I didn't really pursue it until senior year, where I just decided I was going to ask her out for prom. And things were just different with this girl. Like I thought she was cute, but like physical attractiveness wasn't like my main thing with her. It was who she was as a person. It was like her countenance. It was just the goodness that I saw in her. And when I was around her, I just wanted to be more wholesome. I wanted to be just a better person. And I think that's what I was more drawn to. And so I actually started dating this girl after prom and all throughout the rest of senior year. And I think for the first time in my life, I experienced like deep emotional connection with someone. Like we would sit in her car after school and just talk for hours about life. We'd talk about things that she was struggling with, things I was struggling with. And I felt so deeply connected to this person. And I'd never really experienced like deep connection like that before. And so fast forward to, I get my mission call. I prepare to serve a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So I'm leaving on my mission in August. I graduate high school in June. And so I decided, I'd gotten into Brigham Young University, and I decided I was going to go to summer term. And so I ended up moving down to Provo from Harriman and living in a dorm. And so I would kind of go back to Harriman on weekends, hang out with my girlfriend, go to class throughout the week, and kind of hang out with like friends that I made. And the thing about living in the dorms, especially as like a freshman straight out of high school, it's like they're very social. And I was like the only guy that had gone through the temple at that point, and I was also the only guy that had a girlfriend, and the rest of them were kind of like living this high school type life with freedom for the first time in their lives, and they were partying, they were going out and, you know, making out with random girls, and it seemed like I was kind of missing out at the time. And so I kind of started to develop this FOMO over time, and they would do all these fun stuff on the weekends, and I would go home and just spend time with my girlfriend. And so I started to like have a lot of FOMO from that and kind of wanting to participate in that a little bit more. And so I ended up kind of, in my mind, I had very clearly broken things off with this girl. I kind of called her up one day and I was like, hey, like the excuse that I used was like, hey, I'm going on my mission pretty soon. I kind of just want to focus on that. But in reality, there was a lot of social stuff that I felt I was missing out on. And there were obviously really pretty girls, attractive girls around me as well while I was at Provo. And so I kind of wanted to pursue some of these things, right? But it was kind of more vain. It was more like vanity based. It was, you know, because I was getting attention from girls while I was down there, but I'd have to say, oh, I have a girlfriend. And so unfortunately, I kind of decided to like end things with this girl, but on her end, it wasn't as clear that I had ended things. And so for kind of the next month, I just started to kind of party and like go out with like a bunch of different girls and talk to a bunch of different girls. And luckily I didn't do anything stupid. I didn't get like super physical with any of these girls or anything, but it was like it got up to the point where it was like a week before I was leaving for my mission. And then you know, my high school girlfriend called me and she's like, why haven't we talked? Like, why haven't you texted? Why haven't you called? Like, what's going on? And she was just genuinely so heartbroken. And I felt just so guilty that I had let things, basically lust, I guess, for lack of a better term, things like lust and vanity pretty much destroy like this really wholesome relationship that I had and really hurt this beautiful soul. And so I carried like a ton of shame from that for a long time. And so I ended up going on my mission, and my mission helped in a lot of ways. I think it helped start to heal me in a lot of ways. It was on my mission that I realized for the first time that I don't think I deserve to be happy. Because I was facing all this rejection. I was, you know, walking around in a white shirt and tie, and just, you know, when you're on your, you know, I talked about growing up and feeling really self-conscious about how people viewed me, and especially feeling self-conscious from my religion. And suddenly people are like, you're walking around in a white shirt and tie, you stick out like a sore thumb, and everyone's kind of looking at you like, what are these young kids doing? Like, this is so weird, you know? And so I became really self-conscious about that. I have people argue with me, telling me that what I believed was dumb or stupid. I served in the South in Arkansas, where there's a lot of like Protestant Christians, and so I'd have a lot of people like kind of argue with me, tell me that I was wrong, that I was going to hell or whatever it was. And so I really started to feel self-conscious from this sort of thing, and just the rejection over time. Within the very first few months of my mission, I became really depressed. And it came to a turning point where I kind of had my head down and I was walking, and I was so just down and kind of zoned out that I walked out in the middle of the street, and I looked up and there was this huge van just barreling towards me. I kind of had to like jump out of the street, and I was like, oh shoot, I could have like died. And eventually, like, we got back to our apartment. I was just kind of thinking about that experience, and I was like, would I have been sad if I had gotten hit by that van? Like, and so I started to just ask myself these questions. I was like, do I think that I deserve to be happy? You know, and because of the way I had ended things with this relationship, and because of, you know, certain things that I had done before my mission, and all these just negative self-beliefs that I held, I concluded like, I genuinely don't think I deserve to be happy. And I just like bawled, you know, for probably like an hour. And that was like the first time that I think I realized that I had these negative self-beliefs going on, and I didn't really know what to do with them or how to help them. But as I kind of went throughout my mission, I guess before I even got to the field, kind of to backtrack a little bit, there's this place called the Missionary Training Center where they kind of train missionaries to go and kind of hype them up for their mission, get them all excited to go out and actually do missionary work. And I listened to a talk while I was there. It's called The Character of Christ by Elder Bednar. David A. Bednar, he's an apostle for the church. And he said, the character of Christ is to turn out when the natural man would turn inward, right? And so every time that you make your missions about you, you need to look to the example of Jesus Christ, who in his suffering, in the greatest moments of his suffering, he turned outward and looked outward to other people and cared about them more than he cared about his own immediate needs. And so I heard that, but I didn't really, it was hard. It took me a while to like start to put that into practice. And for like really the first year of my mission, I really struggled. Like I was really depressed. I was really sad. And it all just kind of came to a turning point, like around my year mark. I really missed my family. I missed my life back home. I had a good life back home. I had a lot of friends that liked me. I had a lot of attention from a lot of different girls, which is how I based my value. Whereas on the mission, like you can't date, you can't do any of these things. And so it was really hard for me to feel valuable if I wasn't impressing girls. And so I wanted to like write home and have girls like read my emails and be like, wow, Spencer's this great missionary. He's this great guy, sort of thing. Yeah. I wanted the sister missionaries in my mission to see like my baptism photos, that I was like being a really productive and good missionary. And I wanted to like receive validation in this way. But kind of around the year mark of my mission, I decided like, look, I can't have another year like this last year that I've had. Like something needs to change. And on our mission, they were kind of teaching us to fear no man, like talk to everyone you see, that sort of thing. And I was just like, at that point, I was like, you know what? Like, frick it, basically. Like, I am going to talk to literally every single person I see and just stop caring how they react to me. If they argue with me, if they tell me that I'm wrong or whatever happens, I don't care. What matters to me is that I try, right? And so I got in this mindset where I was just like, I just embraced being this dorky little missionary in his white shirt and tie, biking around, having people be like, what the heck are these kids doing? I just embraced that. And I embraced the rejection. I embraced talking to every single person and not being outcome focused, and instead being focused on, like, it doesn't really matter if this person listens to me or agrees with the points I'm trying to make or not. I just want to help this person. Like, I don't necessarily have to go teach them a lesson and teach them about our church, but let's see if they have something in their life that they need help with. Like, do they need help in their yard? Or can I pray with this person for, 30 seconds and see if I can brighten their day? Or can I make this person smile, right? And as I started to focus more on other people, those insecurities started to go away. By the time I was going home from my mission, I had gained like 60 pounds. I'd honestly gotten like really chubby, and like was probably looked the least attractive I've ever looked in my life. But I was more confident than I had ever been, because my confidence was no longer based in things like physical attractiveness and attention from girls and all these things. It was based in, it was just a 100% direct focus on other people and how can I bless and serve them and improve their lives. And kind of having the missionary lessons with people, I'd sit down with drug addicts, I'd sit down with people with trauma, even sexual trauma, just really difficult things that they're going through in their life, people experiencing poverty. And they would just kind of vent to me and open up and be really vulnerable. And even though I had lived like a really good, comfortable life before my mission, I found that I was able to talk to them and help them. And I just naturally had a gift at that. And so I remember thinking towards the end of my mission, I was like, maybe I should look into being a therapist. and maybe I would be good at that. And so I get to the end of my mission, I go home, and I have like this newfound sense of confidence in who I am, that I can talk to anybody, that I can do all these things, right? And the thing is, I immediately went back to college when I got home from my mission. And so there was a lot of pressure, kind of social pressure. A lot of people were telling me, like, you need to get out of missionary mode. You need to figure out how to be a normal person again. And I found out later that learning how to be a normal person again was basically learning how to care what other people think again. And like looking back, I would tell that kid, do not listen to that crap, but I very much listened to it. And I started to, again, base my worth and my value in girls and in dating, right? And so I started to, go on lots of dates and kind of talk to a lot of girls. And I found that, there was kind of two classes of girls. There was girls that I was genuinely interested in and that I wanted to pursue. And then there were girls that, this kind of sounds bad, but I guess that I could, without as much effort, were just naturally attracted to me. And I was like, oh, I guess they're like cute enough, but I don't know if I see a long-term relationship. So I'll just seek like a short-term relationship in this, And so, you kind of start to have these kind of short-term relationships with girls that, you don't see like long-term interest in. Right. But the girls that I saw like long-term potential in, for whatever reason, it seemed like every single time, like they would friend zone me, or it wouldn't work out, or they'd ghost me, or whatever it was. And so the girls that I really wanted to pursue long time didn't work out. And I was like, well, if I can't have that, I guess I'll settle for a short-term relationship that can at least validate me or gratify me in some way, right? And so these short-term relationships were really physically based, right? Making out, touching, cuddling, getting really physical, that sort of thing. And so I started to seek like comfort and solace in these relationships. And I just noticed that every time it just made me feel more and more empty. And so a lot of things happened as I kind of went through my time at BYU. But I started dating this one girl who, she was an athlete on one of the BYU sports teams, and she was really tall and really pretty, had a really nice body and all these things. But I just wasn't experiencing as much connection with her. And again, I was like attributing that to myself. I was like, I just need to be better. I just need to be better at talking to her. I need to be funnier, all these different things. And so even though I had this feeling that it wasn't quite right, I kept on kind of pursuing this relationship and trying to make it work. And eventually she broke things off with me, and she's like, yeah, I know the difference between like feeling like something's right and feeling like it's not right. And this is the feeling that I've had recently. I'm like, shoot, well, that's kind of the feeling I've had too. But it's still, the rejection like still hurt, right? Because I attributed again that it was like some lack that I had, some inadequacy that I had. And that's the reason why this relationship didn't work out. And so I was really sad about this relationship for like 6 months after. Like for a whole 6 months, I was really sad about this relationship. And then in June of 2020, I actually had 3 friends that passed away in a car accident. So they were coming back from Mona rope swing, and their car was struck on the passenger side by a train. And so it was 2 of my roommates. So Tanner Davies, he was in the back passenger side. He was killed on impact. My roommate Jake was driving, so he was moved to the hospital, and he was in a coma for 4 days before passing away. And then his girlfriend Brielle was in the passenger seat, and she was rushed to the hospital and died a few hours later. And so this is obviously like a really traumatic event, really difficult for me, and I was kind of grieving like this loss, but also I had this feeling of like I didn't really invest in these relationships while these people were here. Like I was just kind of there. and I wasn't the best roommate at times, and I had this sense of regret that I hadn't had as much connection with these people before. And again, I attributed that to some kind of fundamental inadequacy in myself. And so I'm kind of grieving these sort of things as I go into like 2021. And I kind of became less spiritual, didn't really have a great relationship with God at this point. I was really jaded from these certain things. And so I basically, towards the end of 2020, I was like, I really need to like improve myself, right? Because I still felt like I had these fundamental inadequacies, and the answer was to work on myself, right? And so I started to like read my scriptures every day again and pray every day. And I started to like have the Spirit more in my life. I started to feel closer to God, kind of like I did on my mission. And I started going, I was going to the gym a lot at this point, but I started to kind of like really like hammer down my fitness and that sort of thing. And then I finally decided to go to therapy for the first time, because like I kind of realized like, at different points in my life, like I have these negative self-beliefs, and I should probably work on those and address those.
What was like that big thing that pushed you to go to therapy? Because I mean, hearing your whole story, a lot of people would just push that off and they won't even consider it. Or there's a lot of stigma around therapy or going to therapy. So you said you like just went to therapy, but what really got you there to make that jump?
Yeah. So I mentioned how I thought that therapy, like a therapist, might be a good career role for me. Someone said to me right when I got home from my mission, I mentioned that I'm thinking about like being like a mental health counselor or therapist. And they're like, well, if you get married, that's going to be a career that's going to be really hard on your marriage, because you're going to be carrying a lot of baggage from other people, and it's going to be really hard to not let that secondhand trauma basically affect your marriage in a negative way. And me constantly looking for validation from women, being this hopeless romantic that wants this ideal marriage, that scared the crap out of me to hear that. And so I was like, well, maybe I won't do that then. And so I go forward. I eventually choose computer science as my major. Excuse me. And so I basically chosen computer science because it, there are always jobs in software, and they pay really well. And so my value was based on basically girls will want me if I have a more stable job and stable income, right? And all I want is just for this, perfect long-term relationship where someone finally accepts me for who I am, and I can get over these fundamental inadequacies that I feel about myself. And so I picked computer science, and I'd kind of done all my general classes first. And so when I started getting into computer science classes, I had like 5 coding classes all at once, and they all had labs, like coding labs due on Fridays or on Saturdays. And so it was a lot to try and get done in a week, right? And I found myself that a lot of the people in the computer science majors, they had already had experience with coding. They're already naturally good at it. And I really struggled to understand some things. I found the problem solving aspect of it really gratifying. But when I found a problem that I couldn't solve, that I couldn't control, it was just absolutely overwhelming for me. And I got to the point where I was falling behind in my assignments. Like I'd finish one of my labs, like one of the 5 by like Thursday. And then I'd have to finish like the other 4 somehow by Saturday. And so I was really falling behind, and I got to the point where I was pretty much failing all of my classes. And I would be like in the TA queue for hours, which was super full, by the way, because a lot of people had questions to ask. And I'd wait like 4 hours just to be able to talk to a TA And he'd be like, "Oh, you forgot to put a semicolon here. Here's why your entire program isn't running." You know, it'd be like super simple solutions. I'm like, why was I too dumb to like figure that out, right? And I again attributed that to like fundamental inadequacy on my own, right? And so I started to have like actual panic attacks, like related to school. Like when I found like a program that I couldn't get to run, or a project or a lab that I just couldn't get despite my best efforts, like I'd be up at 2 a.m. still trying to figure it out. And I really had this obsession that I couldn't put it down until I figured it out. You know, I couldn't just like go take a breather or walk away, because then I would just still obsess on it. It was almost like this OCD like tendency, and I would have like actual panic attacks. You know, and I got to the point where I was like, okay, something is not okay. Right. And so I ended up pretty much withdrawing from all my classes, like flunking out of that semester. I was like, I need to go to therapy. Right. So I registered for like the free counseling that BYU offers its students. They have a counseling center. It's called CAPS. And the waiting list for it was like 3 months. And so it was still like 3 months out. And I was like, I guess I'll just keep doing school in the meantime. And, you know, I'll just wait, you know, until this happens. In the meantime, you know, I'd been doing all this self-work, self-improvement, working out, trying to get more spiritual, trying to be more disciplined and organized in all areas and aspects of my life. And I remember like praying and asking God, like, God, can you just help me? Like, I've just waited my whole life to find my person. And I've just feel like I'm 22 at this point, right? Side note, I guess our culture, kind of within the church, especially culturally, we really encourage people to date and date seriously in their early 20s. And I was seeing a lot of my friends like get girlfriends and get married around this time as well. And so you have like this sense of FOMO and this sense of being left behind as well. And so, you know, all this was happening. I was like, God, like I'm trying my best, and I've waited so long for this time in my life to just find my person. Can that time just be now? And I remember praying and asking God, like, is there anyone that maybe I've met in the past that I've overlooked, that maybe I should reach out to? And I started scrolling through my contacts, and this particular girl's name stood out to me. It was a girl that I'd become friends with my freshman year, and she had actually left on a mission. And then she was still on her mission, but she had like a couple months left. And so I started like emailing this girl during this time, right? And so we kind of are emailing back and forth. She gets home, and I kind of start going to therapy around the time that she gets home, and we're kind of talking. And then she comes up to BYU and like starts classes. We start hanging out, and really quickly we kind of start dating. Like really, really fast. And I'm like, what? Like this never happened before. Like every time it's someone that I'm interested in, like they lose interest eventually. Or if, you know, it's someone that I'm not interested in, that's the people who like pursue me, you know? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, this is wild. I can't believe like this is happening. Like, and so I got my first girlfriend since high school after like 4 years. And I was like, all right, this is it. Like, I guess this is an answer to that prayer. I guess this is the person that God has destined or determined for me, you know? And so I just fell really fast. Like I was very, very confident that like, you know, I was going to marry this girl, and that things were going to work out. So I'm going to therapy at this point, and then I kind of finish all my sessions, and I keep dating this girl, and things are going really, really well. Like things felt so easy. Like I didn't have to pretend to be someone. I could just talk to her so naturally. I could just, you know, be myself. It was a very loving relationship. But I still had these kind of fundamental feelings of inadequacy and always questioning, am I enough in this relationship? And always kind of fearing that she was going to leave at some point, fearing that, that she was going to abandon me basically. And we really only dated for a couple months, which is the crazy thing. But I was just so attached to this girl. And to the point where we were even talking about marriage. Like, she was from California. I was going to go to California for the summer because she was going back home for the summer, and I was going to do sales and basically like save up money for like a wedding ring and like a down payment on like an apartment and all these different things. Like, that was kind of my goal. And all of a sudden, like out of nowhere, she kind of just pulls up to my apartment one day and she was like, hey, can we talk? All right. And I was like, no, like, God, please, no.
Not the talk.
And basically what she told me, she's like, I've felt like I need like a definite answer, a definite assurance to know if this is right. And so I've kind of been praying to know if this is right. And I told God like that I love you and that I don't want to break up with you. And that I won't unless if he gives me a definite answer that I should. And this morning I got that definite answer. And like, there's not really a whole lot you can say with that. It's kind of like a trump card of like, God told me to, basically. But I was kind of upset. I was like, I believe love is a choice. Like, I believe love is a choice. I don't think God's going to explicitly tell you like who or who not to be with. Like, so like, don't put this on God, basically. And we just had like, kind of went back and forth for like a little bit. And yeah, her decision was made. She was, she was done. She was breaking up with me. And I spiraled super, super bad after this. And this was after I'd kind of gone to therapy for the first time. And I spent probably the next 3 months just in the worst depression of my life. Like, crying every single day, like depression, suicidal thoughts all the time, feeling like, why would I pray that and ask God, like, can this time finally happen in my life? Having him dangle it in front of me like a piece of meat, like to like a starving person, basically, and then just like rip it away from me. And I was so hurt and I was so bitter about that. And eventually I found a friend group that I really grew to love, and I'm still, close to them at this point. We've kind of got different stuff in our lives going on, so we don't hang out as much, but we're still like really close. I found a friend group. We went and did a bunch of things, and so kind of from there, I got a lot of different advice from people, and one of the advice was to go travel. And so eventually I was, hanging out with this friend group a lot. We'd go on different trips together and go do all these fun and crazy things. And we were doing stuff pretty much every night of the week, going and doing random things. And it was like the most fun I've ever had in my life. Deep down, I was still like really hurt and sad about this relationship, but I just tried to numb it and cover up with, going and spending time with these friends and going and doing these fun things. But deep down, like, the pain was still there. And in quiet moments, I'd still be really sad about it. So, I traveled, I did all these things. I continued going to the gym. And then eventually I went back to therapy, and I sat down with this therapist. His name was Doug. So shout out Doug. And so, he sits down and he's like, how can I help, basically? And I was like, well, I got like dumped by my girlfriend a few months ago, and I'm still like really struggling. Like, I feel like I can't really move on from it. I still feel like I'm basically trying to win her back by doing all these, by living life to the fullest, by posting on social media, trying to show her like, oh, look how fun and amazing my life is. um, and Doug starts like crying. And I'm like, what the heck is going on, dude? Like, I'm like, this is wild, dude. And he's like, I just want you to know, like, I can tell you're like a really good dude. And whoever ends up with you is like really fortunate. And I was like, I didn't really believe that at that point in my life. And people have told me things like that. And I was like, yeah, whatever, sure. I'm just watch. Like my life always goes this way. I always get let down. I always get disappointed. Like, people can tell me I'm this great dude or whatever, but it doesn't matter. But he's like crying. And I found out in the second session, that very morning, his girlfriend had texted him and said, can we talk? And then at night after our first session, his girlfriend had broken up with him.
No way.
And so like me and Doug, we're like going through it together, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I go on like this therapy journey with Doug. I meet with him like the entire summer. And I learn like a ton about myself. I'm introduced to this book. It's called You Are the One You've Been Waiting For, which is basically, it talks about how in Western society, we've romanticized the concept of this perfect partner who can meet all our needs and can basically heal us and cure us and basically assure us that all our insecurities aren't true. And all our fears and doubts about us not being enough aren't true, right? And we have like this very romanticized concept of a partner, and it's it's a fallacy, right? It's a complete fantasy, and the shift that we need to make is doing that for ourselves, like healing ourselves, giving ourselves that validation. And so I was like, whoa, like I have my whole life, I've sought validation in this way. And so I go on this therapy journey with Doug. I actually switched my major to psychology, and I start taking psychology classes, and I'm loving them. Like those computer science classes, like I swear, sometimes I was just watching the clock, just trying to get out. Felt so unfulfilled, like such a lack of meaning and purpose in what I was studying. And I was like, I switched to psychology, and it was like night and day. And I started to love psychology. I started, working at places like residential treatment centers with teenagers. Had a lot of difficult, but also a lot of really gratifying experiences with that. And for time's sake, I won't go into all that. But so basically, I go through therapy with Doug, and then I end up deciding to go to Spain for 2 months. And it was while I was in Spain that I still realized I was like, I think still deep down my purpose, like coming here in the first place, was to like post it on social media and make my life seem interesting and valuable, so that maybe my ex-girlfriend would see it and like miss out. And so I still realized that like everything I was doing in the name of self-improvement was basically to like try and either win her back or prove to her or myself or maybe some other girl that I was enough, and so, yeah, I came to that realization, and then I, got home from Spain. I ended up sitting down with her and just kind of catching up, and basically like, it was like the final closure that I needed. It was like, hey, like I still have these feelings, and I think I know what the answer already is, but I just need to hear from you, like, if you ever see any potential in this happening. And she's like, honestly, like I'm really grateful for the time that we dated, but I don't see it like working out ever again in the long term. And that was like the final closure, I guess, for me. And I was like, well, what now? I've lived basically the last year of my life trying to prove to myself, trying to do all these things to prove that I was enough for this girl, and it still wasn't enough, right? And so I just kind of kept going through school. I'd kind of have flings with girls every now and then, or crushes every now and then, and it never kind of seemed to work out. And then, continued to work in residential treatment and studying psychology, and I eventually graduate. And then Shortly after graduation, I ended up moving home back in with my parents, which was kind of really humiliating in a lot of ways because I was kind of removed from like my friends and my friend group, and I'd have to drive like 40 minutes to go see them. And so I felt like very isolated, very disconnected. And, that the dating scene is a little bit harder out here in Harriman. There aren't as many like options and that sort of stuff. And so I've kind of been living here at home for the last year, basically answering the question of how do I seek value in myself? Like, how do I define my worth in different things? And I've realized that pretty much throughout my whole life, I have sought for validation from other people, right? Things really came to the head. And actually, how I created Turn Outward was I had this friend group back in Provo that I'd met actually after I'd moved home. And so I would be going up like 4 or 5 times a week to Provo, spending a lot of gas money to go hang out with this friend group. And I truly felt accepted and appreciated in this friend group. And they would tell me comments like, dude, I'm so glad we met you. Like, you're such a cool dude. Like, you're such a good dude. Like, all these things. And I felt valued and accepted and really close in this friend group. And so that was kind of the validation that I was getting from them. And, like a lot of friend groups, things eventually kind of got messed up a little bit by like dating and attraction. And that's kind of what you see in a lot of friend groups. They kind of like someone starts liking someone else, and then someone doesn't, someone else likes that person. And there's like, kind of rips the friend group apart. So there was kind of a girl in this friend group that, like initially I wasn't attracted to, cause I saw kind of like these, I don't want to like put this person on blast or anything, but I saw some like red flags in this person, and I could tell that there was like some interest from their end, but I was like, no, like I don't want to do that. Like, I'm not. And then eventually, as kind of the summer went on, there was a few girls that I was like genuinely interested in, that kind of rejected me again. And so then I was still getting attention from this girl, and this girl was really attractive, really pretty. And so I was eventually like, okay, like, I don't know, let's see where this goes. And it like the whole time when I like actually started to pursue it, it just felt so wrong. But I like couldn't help myself and just like needing that validation, needing that attraction. And so eventually, like a lot of these things, like that girl ended up like ending things with me, right? Because she kind of could tell it, that things were off and that sort of thing. And then afterwards, there's a little bit of drama. She's like, I don't know if I made the right choice or not, because I like still kind of like you. And I was like, oh yeah, And so I kind of gave her a second chance, and then she friend zoned me a second time, and it was just a mess. And then eventually, while we were still kind of talking as like more than friends, we'd planned on going to this trip to Hawaii, and so it was like her and like another girl from the friend group, and we were meeting up with someone who went to BYU Hawaii that was also from the friend group, that had kind of moved away. And so I go on this trip, and it was a really fun trip. Had a great time. Towards the end of the trip, I decided to kind of I was in the car alone with like this girl, and so it's kind of awkward. Like, you guys have like, are we friends? Are we more than friends? Like multiple times. And so I didn't really know what to talk about, and so started talking about another person in the friend group that was kind of going through a hard time. And kind of like my initial intention with starting the conversation was like, how do you think we can help this person, basically? And I won't go into full details of the situation, because it's really messy, and there's a lot of like, basically this other person was hurt really bad by another person, and I kind of gave my take on why I thought that happened. And it ended up really offending this person. And I didn't know at the time, because I kind of tried to check with this person and be like, hey, like if there's anything I said like that was out of line or wasn't okay, like let me know. And they just kind of was like, no, it's fine, it's whatever. And then there was kind of like this awkwardness like the rest of the trip until we went home, and I could kind of tell something was off. And then I was hanging out with I was going to the gym with another guy in the friend group, and I could tell he was like upset with me at some point. And so I found out that this other person in the friend group had told this person and also like 3 other people in the friend group about something that I had said. And I felt like the things I had said had kind of been twisted a little bit so they sounded a lot worse than they actually were, and like that my intention was kind of twisted behind it. And basically it led to this friend group just completely falling apart. And this was extremely painful for me because I again found validation in this friend group. And I genuinely had like hatred, like genuine like hatred for this person, that she had told other people that I had been vulnerable with her, and that I had started the conversation with good intentions, and that had somehow been flipped, that I had bad intentions. And I like held on to like genuine hatred for this person for, I want to say like 8 or 9 months, like just so hurt and angry. And I like really socially isolated myself from those people and like cut off the ties to those people. And the fact that I was viewed as the bad guy in the situation, that I had to be the one to apologize, like it just bothered me so much. And looking back on it now, like I definitely see the mistakes that I made, like the things that I said that were out of line, that weren't okay to say, and the ways that I was wrong. And I also see how I was wrong in like hating and judging this person. But for so long I was just so hurt, and I just couldn't get over it. And I would just pray and pray and say, God, like help me stop hating this person. Help me to move on. And it felt like that prayer wasn't really answered, because day after day after day, I was just so hurt and upset about it. And one day I was just kind of thinking about it, and the thought came to my head, and I believe that this was from God, but he said, are you ready to stop making this all about you? And I was like, dang. I was like, dang, bro, like that's exactly what I've been doing. Like I've been making this whole situation all about myself, making myself the victim of the situation, feeling like a victim, feeling this genuine hatred towards this person. And then I remembered the character of Christ talk. And I just started to study that talk again and kind of what it meant. And I had realized that, one, I had wanted to start a mental health podcast for a really long time. And 2, a general trend that I had noticed every time in my life where I hit rock bottom, or I felt like I was a burden on this earth, and that I didn't fit in, and that I had to like pretend to be someone else in order to get people to accept me. The answer was always to turn outward. The answer was always to like forget myself and then focus on helping someone else. And that actually helped heal me, just like it did on the mission, right? And so I slowly started like coming up with this idea for a podcast, to where I was like, you know what? Like I have lived so much of my life just craving to be seen, just craving to receive positive attention and to be regarded well by other people. And that's one of the reasons why that fallout from that friend group was so devastating for me, was because I was regarded well by that friend group. Like they regarded me as like this really good guy, this really awesome person, and then suddenly their opinions became that I was like this monster, or at least that's how I perceived it, right? That I was like this monster, I was like this bad dude, and that's why it was so damaging for me. And I was like, you know what? I want to start figuring out how to like no longer feel this need for this validation from other people. And I think maybe part of starting the podcast was also looking for validation in a way. I was like, oh, if I can say all these smart psychological things, or if I can, you know, say all these smart spiritual things, or like help people in this way, then people are going to think I'm this great guy, and then I'm not. And so, you know, maybe part of it was born out of seeking validation. I think as I've done it more and more, I've tried to get out of that place of doing the podcast for attention or validation or approval of someone else, and genuinely doing it to help other people. I was playing basketball last night, and one of the guys I play with, he came up to me and he was like, dude, I just want you to know that like I started listening to the podcast. I listen to every single episode.
Wow.
Like back to back to back to back.
Wow.
I've put out like 25 episodes at this point. You know, that's like a lot of time.
That's a lot of hours.
And he's like, it helped me so much. Like that's exactly what I was needing to hear. And I was like, dude, that is what it's all about right there. You know, and whether or not the podcast blows up or gets viral, like that's one person whose life was positively changed and blessed because of something I did. Right. And so that's what makes it all worth it to me. And something that you and I talked about in your interview, and I think maybe you talk about this concept better than I do, is seeking connection over validation. Validation is basically looking for approval or affirmation, right, for yourself, wanting someone else to approve of you. Connection is wanting to feel a mutual understanding with someone else, wanting to help them feel seen first. And then as a natural consequence, you also end up feeling seen, right? And so that's a recent shift that I've had in kind of my mindset in friendships and dating and all my relationships in my life. I want to stop like being so desperate and being so needy for that validation. And instead I want to give it to other people and truly feel connected to them. Because I think, like you said, so many of us feel disconnected. So many of us feel misunderstood, right? Again, going back to that situation in Hawaii, I felt misunderstood, right? And that's why it was so painful, right? And what I wanted was to be understood, right? But I wasn't as open to understanding first. Yeah, dude, I know I just kind of rambled for like the longest time, but thank you for sitting here and listening to all that.
Yeah, I was like, dude, your story is so raw. It's so real. And I think that's what more people need. I feel like there's a huge demand for like real authenticity and realism and rawness, but there's such a lack of like that actually being out there. And I find even just like listening from your story and stuff, it's like there's so much to like relate to. There's so much to be like, yeah, like I'm not like the only one going through this. And I think when people are able to actually hear that from somebody else and like their own experiences and stuff, it helps them to be able to be like, whoa, okay, like these thoughts are normal. Like this guy is getting through it, so I can get through it too. The question I have for you is, what's your approach now to relationships and friendships and connecting with people?
Yeah, I do want to preface and say, like, I don't consider myself some kind of relationship guru or expert in any way, but I'm definitely still trying to figure this stuff out for myself, and I think that's okay. I think so much of life is just enjoying the process of uncertainty and not being so outcome focused. Like, I think my mindset now could be like, I just need to get to a point where I'm like so good at relationships and I'm just so good at like connecting with other people, and then I'll be happy once I have connection. But just like learning to like give myself grace and enjoy the process of figuring it out, because I am still figuring it out. I think, like I said, I'm not perfect at it, but I think some of the things that I'm trying to do right now is learning how to talk a little bit less. Because one thing I've noticed, especially in social situations, and I'm not doing a great job of it right now, obviously.
This is about you.
I've just been yapping, man. But learning how to talk less, especially on first dates, I think I always felt like a need to basically put my resume out there and like say all these interesting things about myself. Like, oh, I went and lived in Spain for 2 months and I've traveled to all these cool places and I have a podcast and I'm this really caring, loving, spiritual dude that you should be interested in, and recognizing that just talking about feeling a need to say all those things, like I shouldn't feel a need to say them because that's what I am, like if I truly am that, then I shouldn't need to like prove it to other people. Like I can just be myself, and that's what they're gonna notice about me. And so learning to talk about myself less, and then ask more genuine questions. And something that Jordan Peterson said is they're like casting bait at you constantly. Like they'll say something hoping that you bite on it, hoping that you take the bait, right? And so if someone says something in a conversation, I'll see like, are they trying to get me to be more curious about it and ask more about it, right? And so two phrases I'm trying to say more are, oh, that's interesting, tell me more about that, and wow, what was that like for you? Just those two phrases alone, I think, show people that you have genuine interest in them, right? Shows that, I don't know, that you actually care, right? That you're not just there to flex and put your resume out there and show how cool you are, right? And that's what I think meeting you and having our podcast interview and becoming your friend has been so awesome, is because Brody has taught me that. I mean, he's like a master at this. He's so good at it. And so if you want to learn how to do this better, I would talk to Brody, not me, right? Because I'm still figuring this stuff out. But yeah, those are definitely things I'm trying to do. And then I don't know, as any good therapist is so good at just validating someone else's experience and like asking them questions and getting to understand them. And they don't necessarily need to give them advice. They don't necessarily need to tell them what to do, which in a lot of my sessions, even though, I've had great sessions, I feel a lot of what I do is giving people advice or teaching people things, right? Which obviously I'm not like fully licensed to do therapy anyway, so that's kind of my job right now. But like in my future career, I want to be so good at doing therapy to where I can just ask people questions and have them figure stuff out for themselves, rather than like giving it to them or telling it to them, because I think that's where it sticks more.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think that process of like self-discovery, because there's so much information that's out there and that's available for people. But I think one of the problems or the things that people have to learn is like, okay, like how can I learn this like lesson for myself? And I feel like once you do that, and like once you take like your own life lessons, like they're gonna stick way longer, because there's a lot more emotion behind it. There's a lot more experience behind it. It's not just some article I read, online, or some research paper that I looked into, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is it. I feel like the lessons that have really stuck with me have come from life experiences, and I think you have a lot of those really cool experiences that that you've been able to take that have happened in your life, and you've turned them into progress for yourself. you've turned them into a way where it's like you are now taking that story, which that story you could have totally shift the narrative and gone to like a victim mentality and like, oh my gosh, like poor me, why me? But I think once you take those stories and those experiences in your own life story and you say like, okay, like what's actually going on here? Why am I acting the way that I am? And how can I change that for the better? And I think that's what it's about is getting to that point there. I got one last question for you.
Let's do it.
And this is a question because the whole premise of Vivier is we want to get people to be able to really start to live their life. That's why we call this the Live It Be It podcast. And so for you, what does it mean to live life to the fullest?
Yeah. I listened to a lot of your previous interviews and I heard people answer this question, and I've thought for a long time how I would answer this question. And it took me a minute because I wasn't exactly sure what I would say, because I think if you would have asked me a year ago or a couple years ago, it would be, get out there and travel and see the world and like have these new experiences and try new things and meet new people and make friendships and all of that. Really solid advice. I just want to say it, but I don't think that it fully embodies living to the fullest. And I think the reason I've come to that perspective is I have a friend, his name's Caden, and I've interviewed him a couple times on the Turn Outward podcast. So he has muscular dystrophy, and he over time his muscles have just become weaker and weaker to the point where he's no longer able to walk by himself. He can't really move his arms a whole lot. He can't really get out of bed or go to the bathroom or do all these normal everyday activities. And so like, if he were to ask me like, how do I live life to the fullest? And I'm like, go travel, go see the world, like go do all these things. He's like, well, like I don't really have the full capability to do all those things. So I guess I can't live life to the fullest. And that's a thing that I think so often when we say like, go do all these things, go out there, live your life. There are people whose circumstances don't necessarily allow them to do that, whether it's financial or physical or whatever it may be. They can't really go try new things as easily or travel as easily and do all these things. And so that advice isn't as practical. And so, I mean, if you're able to do that, great for you. But I don't think that fully embodies what it means to live life to the fullest. I don't even think that, you hear people that are like entrepreneurs and started businesses and are really successful. It's like, go do your passion, go do whatever. And, I'm someone that's following a passion of mine, which is therapy. But if my original passion was like, I wanted to be in the NBA or NFL, like, I would have said that if it was like picking your favorite optimal career is living life to the fullest, I don't think that's necessarily it either. Like, because if I had my way, I'd be catching touchdowns on Sundays right now, so, but I think maybe finding something that fulfills you, and it might not necessarily be your first choice. And kind of allowing life to kind of direct you in that way. I think that's part of it, but I don't think it fully embodies it either. I was actually talking to Kate, and I hope he's okay with me sharing this, but basically what I've learned from him is like living life to the fullest. A huge part of it is coming to peace with what already is. Because I think so often we get in these modes of thinking that if I was just an able-bodied person, if I just had more money, if I could travel more, if I had more freedom, if I could do all these things when I want, how I want, all these things, then I would finally be happy. That's kind of how teenagers feel like when they're living at home and they finally go out for their own and live on their own for the first time. They're like, oh, I finally get freedom and I can do what I want when I want. And then they realize very quickly that that's not how the world works.
Yeah.
And so I think truly living to the fullest is loving where you are right now.
Mm.
There's a saying by James E. Faust. He's a former leader of our church. He said, "Come what may, and love it." And it's that simple. Like, whatever conditions are present in your life, whatever freedoms are current or present in your life, don't give in to the fallacy of "I will be happy when." You can be happy right now, and it's a choice. Right? I ultimately believe that pretty much everything in our lives comes down to a choice, right? Whether it's, do we choose to use certain substances to numb, our difficult emotions? Do we choose to love a certain person or not? Or do we choose to be happy? All of those are choices, and some of the biggest choices we make in life. And so living life to the fullest is a choice. It's not necessarily an easy choice either, because it is easy to give into that victim mindset, or give into the fallacy that I will be happy when these conditions are present in my life. But being able to make the choice of like, I can love my life right now, like that is true freedom in a way. Because yes, my friend Caden might not be able to go drive himself around town and go grab a burger whenever he wants, or just hop on a flight whenever he wants. But in a way, I think he's access to freedom that a lot of us struggle a lot more to develop. It's like he can be happy without all those things. He might sit in his room all day and not be able to do much, but he can still choose to be happy. And that is like true freedom, I think. You you listen to the Count of Monte Cristo. He's in prison for like, what is it, like 20 years or something like that? And I think one of the cellmates has kind of unlocked that same thing. Like he's in a physical prison, right? But he has gained spiritual freedom, mental freedom, emotional freedom, right? So I don't think it necessarily equates to physical freedom, but yeah, man, that's my answer.
I love it. Thank you, Spencer. Again, it's been an absolute privilege to have you on the podcast. I'm excited for people to hear your story, more about you, and I think a lot of people are going to connect with it, relate with it. And as a friend has once told me, vulnerability is strength, and I think you embody that very well. So thanks again.
Thank you so much. This has been a pleasure.
Okay, we'll catch everybody on the next episode. Thank you.
Thank you.